back.
Thank you. Mr. Raskin.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I need to start by asking unanimous consent to submit a statement for the record. Last year, Secretary Holland approved a new constitution for the Cherokee Nation, which explicitly ensures the protection of the political rights of all Cherokee citizens, including the tribe's black members. These individuals are descendants of the Cherokee freedmen who were enslaved by the tribe before the Civil War and were emancipated afterwards. Echoing Secretary Holland, I want to applaud the Cherokee Nation for its decision to honor its moral and legal obligations to the freedmen and their descendants. It's a crucial step towards racial equality, justice, and reconciliation, and it's worthy of our appreciation and our emulation. Mr. Chairman, therefore, I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a statement from Mr. Demario Solomon Simmons of Tulsa, Oklahoma, which commends the Cherokee Nation for taking this step and expresses hope that it will herald a new era of openness and inclusivity in the nation.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, it's an extraordinary moment that you and Mr. Cole have allowed us to have here. And none of us should be unaware of the history-making nature of this proceeding. I wanted to start by asking whether Delegate Teehee is actually present. Delegate Teehee is here. Good. Well, I want to welcome Delegate Teehee, at least on behalf of the good people of Maryland's 8th Congressional District, and it's great to see you here representing the Cherokee Nation. I want to ask a few questions which I think will lead up to my basic point, but I want to make sure I believe in my basic point, so that's why I want to ask some questions. But based on what I've heard, I think there's a one easy question and one hard question before us. The easy question is, do we have a legal and I would say a moral obligation to seat Ms. Teehee? And the answer to that seems to me clearly to be yes. This is just a matter of reading the 1835 Treaty of New Echota and then establishing its meaning and then acting upon it. That doesn't strike me as difficult at all, but I do want to ask a few more questions related to it. The difficult question is, what does it mean to be a delegate from a nation to the House of Representatives, which we've never done before, because the delegates we have are either from territories, American Samoa, Guam, Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, or they are from the District of Columbia, which inhabits still a different sub-constitutional jurisdictional plane. And so this would be new for us, and it's not a foreign nation that we would be seating a delegate for. It's a domestic nation. And so I think that that's the question we need to look at. But let me just quickly try to go through some questions to make sure that I've got confidence in these conclusions. To begin with, have there been delegates elected before by the Cherokee Nation, or is Delegate Teehee the first one?
Delegate Teehee is the first one. If you look in the historic record, there may be references to a delegation going to Washington, D.C., but they were not elected in the formal sense, and they were not done pursuant to this treaty.
And do you have within your records any correspondence historically between the tribe and the House of Representatives or Congress asking to be seated before?
I'm not aware of any contemporaneous documents.
Okay, fair enough. So there's no adverse authority that the Congress said no or the House said no. Okay, that's out there. People have talked about the language in Section 7 of the treaty about whenever Congress shall make provision for the same. Of course, Congress is defined in our Constitution under Article 1, which says that each house shall define the rules of its own proceedings, and we also decide upon our own members, and we certainly decide on our own delegates. It's true that there have been statutes passed before, but they are seated by the House, and this one comes to us in a somewhat different posture because it comes by virtue of treaty. And of course, the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution says that treaties exist on the exact same level as federal statutes do. So it's a binding law upon us. A treaty is binding upon us just like any other federal law would be. So right now, Delegate Teehee came to her official position by virtue of an appointment. Is that right?
That's correct.
And is that under some bylaw that you've written?
That's pursuant to the Constitution of the Cherokee Nation, which was ratified by the Cherokee people.
The new Constitution?
Correct. The Constitution, the new Constitution includes that language, yes.
Gotcha. Okay. All right, so all of this would be self-executing. I guess my question is, what we would have to figure out only is rival claims to being the successor to the Cherokee Nation that entered into the 1835 treaty. And I haven't had a chance to scrutinize the letters like from the United Kituwa Band of Cherokee Indians in Oklahoma. I don't know, how many other claimed rivals are there? Is it just that one? Or
Congressman, from what I heard earlier from the chairman, there were letters received from two bands of Cherokees, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians and the United Kituwa Bands, and I addressed earlier that those claims to successorship, in my opinion, don't withstand any scrutiny.
All right, and so I do think, Mr. Chairman, that's something we would have to figure out. You know, when we say, well, when the court says that's a political question, that means we have to figure it out. It is up to us. Our decision and judgment on that would be binding. It certainly seems from everything I've seen that you guys are the logical successor, but obviously we would have to do our due diligence on that before we, rendered a final decision on it. All right, so then I want to shift to this other question of what actually it would mean to send a delegate here. My understanding of the delegate positions falls into a couple of different categories. If you look at the Northwest Ordinance and the delegate positions that were created then, Jefferson basically had the idea that the delegates would be representing territories that are essentially states in waiting or states in training, states in tutelage to become states, right? And so they would send delegates, and those representatives would learn more about the federal government and also take back information from the federal government to the territories. That's obviously not applicable because you're not on the pathway to being admitted as a state, and that's not part of the understanding, at least as I get it. The other, of course, is the District of Columbia delegate. Washington, D.C. has itself petitioned for statehood, but that's for the non-federal areas. That's for the residential areas, which they want to be ceded to a new state. The existing capital federal district would still be directly under Congress. I don't know whether or not there would still be a non-voting delegate there, but that's also seen as like a permanent part of the country. But so you would arrive as something between a delegate and like an ambassador, right? And I just wonder, that will have implications in terms of how we seat you and what you do, or what Delegate Teehee would do once she gets here. She obviously can't vote on final passage. The Supreme Court and the D.C. Circuit Court have been clear about that, even with respect to these delegates. In a case called Michael versus Anderson, I think it was in 1994, they said these people cannot vote on final passage, even though it's okay for them to vote in committee because that, can be reversed on the floor. So it wouldn't be that. We would want to make sure, presumably, that there be every equal dignity and ceremony attendant to the office that the other delegates get. I guess the big question is serving on committee. And then there is that question of, is there a kind of double representation that, the Cherokee Nation is obviously all over the country. How many states are included?
All 50 states.
All 50 states, okay. So, yeah, in that sense, I guess the members of your nation would be double represented if they had a representative on the committee from their district, and then they also had the Cherokee Nation representative there. I don't know how big a deal that is, because presumably Delegate Teehee or her successors would be looking out for the interests of the nation as a nation. Is that understanding right?
That's my understanding. That's how I read the treaty. That's how I understand her role.
Yeah. So would there be only certain committees that you think she would want to serve on, or you would want your delegate to serve on? Do you not want to serve on committees? And what is your thinking about that?
This is my view of it, Congressman, is that the time, I think the framers of this treaty plainly were concerned about the governmental interest of the Cherokee Nation having a place in this body. If you look at what our governmental interests are today, they really cross every committee that you have. The Cherokee Nation today, here's the shorthand way I would describe our government. We do everything the United States does except maintain a standing army and print money. Sometimes I wish we printed money, but we don't print money. But we do a great deal of things. And so if you look at what we do in terms of our governmental interest, I think it spans the entire depth and breadth of this body. And so I would think that any committee assignment would be fair game. Perhaps there's some exceptions to that, but I think primarily if you focus on what our main day-to-day issues are, certainly natural resources, certainly our engagement with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and certainly anything that touches upon sovereignty would be important. But again, healthcare, human services, infrastructure, it's broad.
Well, so
the Rules Committee.
Yeah.
Is a good committee to serve.
The Rules Committee is a great committee. Well, Mr. Chairman, just on this point, I think that we should be creative in our thinking about it. There may be, a certain committee that the member could be a standing member of, or would be, like natural resources or interior, something like that. Or we could also say, because all of the work of the Congress affects the Cherokee Nation, perhaps the member could just wave on to any committee when there is a hearing of interest to her or to him. I don't know. I think we could think about it differently, because I do think for us, we have to distinguish between the role of territorial and district delegates from the role of a delegate of a nation, even if it's a domestic nation. And in any event, I want to thank you for your patience. That should be a massive understatement, obviously. But I don't think we should be very patient in the final days of this Congress. And I think we should act with dispatch to make this happen. I think there are some final things we got to figure out, but we should move as quickly as possible. I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.